It's a lot of more of the same. It's strengthening up and reprioritising certain areas. And the heart of it all is about productivity, milk growth, and our competitiveness, not only from a global perspective, but within our own domestic market. We're still facing the competition from imports. That's not going to go away.
I'm Matt Cooper, and this is Bite Sides. Welcome to the latest edition of the Ausfine Bite Sides podcast. Pretty excited today. This guy has been part of my life ever since I entered the dairy industry. One of the first people I actually met was the man sitting opposite me now. He is now in a different role than when he started, or when I met him. He is the president of the Australian Dairy Products Federation. Joining us today is Mr. John Williams. John.
Thank you, Matt.
Welcome.
Now you put it in that context, yeah, you're right. It was a while ago.
It was a long, long time ago.
I think you must have been 10 and I was about 15.
Yeah, no, exactly right. Exactly right. We started very early in the dairy world. Yeah. But on that theme, starting off at the beginning, where did you come from, and how did you, at that point, you were working for Warrnambool Cheese and Butter?
Yeah.
How did you get to that part first, and then we'll pick the story up from there.
Yeah, the Warrnambool Cheese and Butter piece was interesting. I didn't plan to be in the dairy industry. There's a lot of other industries I was planning to be in, and it just so happened that's where it all landed. I was with a Japanese company, Mitsui, for 10 years, and they afforded me the opportunity to have a look at a whole range of different businesses and so on.
Sure.
Spent a fair bit of time initially in Sydney, then got transferred over to the Tokyo head office. And I spent 1 year in Melbourne, just as part of the training program, because there were certain businesses in Melbourne they didn't have in the rest of Australia. Hated Melbourne.
Come on.
Went over to Tokyo, and they were due to send me back to Sydney, which is where I wanted to go. And at that time they said, look, we've upped our interest in the dairy sector. We've just invested in this little company in Victoria. It was actually through United Milk Tasmania, so it's going all the way back.
Yeah.
Invested into them, who formed a joint venture with Warrnambool Cheese and Butter.
Okay.
Back in those days. And effectively what that joint venture was about was investing in a new cheese facility and this new thing called whey protein concentrate at the time.
What year was this?
So we're talking about, this is mid-90s we're talking about.
Okay.
And I think that factory was opened up in 97, 98.
This is
a Warrnambool Cheese. This is the Allensford cheese plant at the time. And UMT invested money, but also the technical know-how. It was basically a replica of the Wynyard plant to a certain extent. A couple of new bells and whistles technology that was put in. So I got involved with Warrnambool Cheese and Butter back then as part of that piece. The Japanese company Mitsui I was with at the time invested through UMT. Out of it, Mitsui got the rights to the WPC 80 for the Japanese market.
Wow.
Okay. And also it was a way of Mitsui coming in to try and buy a place in the single desk arrangement that Australian Dairy Corporation had at the time, because at that time, all cheese sold to Japan had to go through a single desk marketing arrangement with the Australian Dairy Corporation.
Yeah.
And then in turn, on the other side were a list of trading houses, which Mitsui wasn't one of them for historical reasons going back in the 50s. So a way of ingratiating themselves on the industry, Mitsui went and invested in UMT, and by doing that, got a sort of seat at the table in regards to that single desk negotiations.
Okay, so with Mitsui investing in Australia, kind of somewhat trying to circumnavigate the status quo, so to speak, of getting into Japan. Just want to put a pin in that really quickly and go back just two steps, and because it seems like you're at the forefront. A lot of these stories I've kind of heard anecdotally, I guess, but you're at the forefront of the WPC, and it sounds like when that was all being developed. And prior to that, the waste stream was a byproduct, was a kind of waste stream, wasn't it?
It was an interesting situation. Yeah, I mean, CSIRO here in Australia were probably at the forefront in having a look at the waste streams, if you like, the whey proteins, and extracting the value out of that. World leaders in this space.
Wow. Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and a lot of that know-how went overseas firstly, before it sort of came back and resonated with Australia, and then we had to start doing something about waste. I don't think we were automatically driven to look at the value add in waste from a processing point of view. I remember the Allansford plant was quite famous because it would just dump that byproduct, which is effectively whey and lactose, into the underground aquifers, and it would just go out to sea. Environmentally terrible because those underground aquifers are all limestone, and this whey was just eating away the limestone, and you'd have pieces of ground just disappear from under you. Farmers were reporting their tractors gone missing down into the ground. These big sinkholes and
really.
So environmentally not great. Warrnambool Cheese Butter got on top of all that. That's all ancient history now. But they had to move quickly to try and find a solution. And so not only was it a solution to manage that environmental issue, in the end, it was probably one of the best value-add investments that a lot of companies could have made at that time. So, yeah.
It's super interesting. And do you know what? That's the second time that has been mentioned on the podcast so far. Was the whey stream? No. Actually, in a somewhat of a different context, but the whey finding its way out into the ocean and the whales feeding on the whey stream. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I thought it was a good story, but interesting.
I've got a little twist to that story. One of the industries that had a detrimental impact on was the crayfish industry down in Warrnambool. They started reporting the size of their crayfishes were reducing.
Oh.
And they made a link to the fact that the crays were eating the whey, and that was what was helping with their size. So,
and they're going backwards in size.
And they were going backwards in size at the time that whey.
That's a counter view to the sports nutrition industry, isn't it?
There you go. There's a whole study there that wasn't ever formalised around the impact of whey protein
on crayfish and whales.
That's it.
So, okay, let's go back to where we were. So you're involved with Mitsui through UNT and get to Allansford and set up the WPC plant, and then where to from there?
So I sort of dabbled in the whey sales side of things, but then I went off into other different projects within Mitsui.
So non-dairy related.
Non-dairy related, exporting carrot juice concentrate to Japan from Australia, importing French fried potatoes from the US into Australia.
Wow.
Whole range of different things.
The breadth of those Japanese trading houses and what they deal in is quite phenomenal.
It was phenomenal. I mean, at the time I was at Mitsui in the 90s, they were the largest foreign-owned company in Australia. So, massive fingers in a whole range of different businesses and assets in Australia. I think they were the second largest exporter out of Australia behind BHP, for example, at that time.
Amazing.
Yeah, so
unbelievable.
Fantastic opportunity for me, and they actually gave me a choice where I wanted to go in the end. And I chose to be in food. I actually started off as a gold bullion trader. But they said, is there somewhere else you'd like to go? And so I started focusing on food. And that's where they said, come down to Melbourne because that's where the food hub is. So then I got transferred to Melbourne. About 2 weeks before I was to leave Tokyo, back to Melbourne. And I'm still here.
Which you hated.
I got to love it.
And so you moved back here in food, which specifically was at then dairy, with a focus on dairy or no?
No, it was a whole range of different things I mentioned before, different projects. But then I left Mitsui towards the end of the 90s, and John McLean, at the time managing director of Warrnambool Cheese and Butter, rang me up and said, we are taking a whole different strategy with our sales role. At the time, with the UMT joint venture, UMT effectively looked after all the sales for the whey protein and the cheese. Warrnambool Cheese and Butter's lot in life was to secure the milk and run the factories and so on. United Milk Tasmania got taken over by Bonlac, if you want to go back there. And then John McLean had the foresight to go, I don't like where this new CEO at Bonlac is taking this organisation. I think it's time we pulled the pin. They had a preemptive strike in relation to the fact there's a change of ownership of UMT. Yep. They could pull out of the joint venture. Okay. So he got me on board before they triggered that to say, we don't have any sales and marketing set up here at Warrnambool Cheese and Butter. Can you structure that up? So that's what I came on board for. I thought it was a fantastic, exciting opportunity to build this thing from scratch. Even though the product already had a presence in the market, that made it somewhat easier. But then to basically build up that infrastructure, that resource with Warrnambool Cheese and Butter was an exciting opportunity. So I joined them in beginning 2000.
Okay, so you came in as the sales team of one and then build out the team, or other people joined you at the same time?
Exactly.
Okay.
So it was a bit of a ragtag bunch. We got a couple of people who I thought had some selling nous within the business. We got some people out of the lab to help with some R&D, and then we got a couple of externals in. We built it up, yeah.
Fantastic. And then it's actually a question I did want to get to, but this is kind of taking a lovely evolution towards that anyway. So then if we just continue the Warrnambool story, they then were purchased by Saputo in the Canadian dairy company. What year was that, and how did you see that transition from being Warrnambool was listed, wasn't it, at that time?
Warrnambool was an interesting structure. So Warrnambool Cheese and Butter everyone thought it was a cooperative. Well, probably the oldest dairy company. 1888 it was founded. And interesting that 6 people that founded that company, none of them were actually dairy farmers. They just saw an opportunity of being able to centralise the purchasing of milk and processing it into butter and so on. That's what they foresaw the opportunity being. And then out of that, they brought shareholders in who was farmers. So over that history, they were never a cooperative per se, where, the definition of a cooperative, it's 100% owned by the farmers who supplied them the product. It was never in that position, but the vast majority of the shareholders had always been farmers. And Warrnambool Cheese and Butter always acted on cooperative principles, making sure that, that resource, the milk and the farms looked after primarily, and then hopefully turn it into a good product that would enable them to return a profit to their shareholders, which were both farmers, local business people, and so on and so forth.
Sure.
So I got to the point where, with that sort of mishmash of shareholders, we've got to create some value for the shares. So the company looked at various ways of doing that, trying to avoid at that stage a publicly listing on the ASX. We looked at secondary markets, we looked at a whole range of things. But at the end of the day, we land on the fact that to get true maximum value for our shareholders for their shares, we would list. So we listed. And that was in 2002, 2003, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So once you list, then, you start getting, people selling their shares and other people buying their shares. And so your registry starts to expand, and we got a vast range of different shareholders at this point in time, which makes it very interesting because we're competing with cooperatives, who are paying everything out to their farmers. And so therefore we have to match that price, but we've also got shareholders who want us to make a profit and give them a dividend, and also create value for their shares. So that makes for a very interesting dynamic within our industry, where you've got cooperatives on one side and you had large multinational listed on the other, and here's Warrnambool Cheese and Butter with their own little dynamic in the middle. And with that, we looked at various things. We got close to a merger with Bega. That they weren't a publicly listed company, so they went out and listed. And then when they came back to talk to us, they basically said, we're going to buy you. So that triggered all of that. And then we already had quite a few companies who were interested in, if it got to that point, buying us out if there was some synergy or something they could do. Saputo had been there for a long time. They'd been visiting us since the early 2000s. And we were saying at the time, we're not for sale. And then when this process kicked off with Bega and then Murray Goulburn came in, Saputo came and said, well, you are for sale now. And we're very, very interested. So that's how that started. And I think they were finally successful. And I'm not going to play out all the history and everything that went on with that. They were successful in acquiring us, and our shareholders were very happy with that. They paid what probably was the largest and will probably be historically the largest multiple that anyone's achieved in the dairy industry. So we as the management of that were very happy with that and glad to create that value, and made some people in the southwest of Victoria. It was a life-changing moment for a lot of them as well.
Yeah. Absolutely true. It's funny your comment just then around the tension of having shareholders in an industry somewhat dominated by cooperatives and the way they run their business and milk price paid to farmers. And I've mentioned it many times, the way that milk is priced here in Australia, but it was almost like your experience was a forbearing of what was to come for others. You guys were the first ones to experience it. But now it's the norm. Yeah. Now we still somewhat historically price milk in a cooperative style of step-ups, etc., or that similar starting price, etc. But that, but as I've mentioned many times in the podcast before, there's no cooperatives left. But still, we go down that path.
Yeah.
Back then, they were majority cooperatives, right? And so that's what you guys were having to tread new ground of. How do you survive as a shareholder structured business in a cooperative world? So it's super interesting. I find just the way this legacy has just kind of continued through our industry.
Yeah, and look, it wasn't without its struggles and it wasn't without its opportunities. Trying to get that balance right was so important in regards to maximising value for everybody, But once again, we're a small company where we were a price taker within the market largely. And we were pedaling very, very hard to diversify ourselves away from bulk commodities. And in doing that, taking some risks, we got into, we had the WPC, that was great. We still had this waste, lactose largely, and minerals and so on, and trying to find out added value in that. We were only a small team ourselves. We didn't know what was going on globally. We tried to, as much as we possibly can to learn about all that, and found that was probably the best thing to do was to partner on technology. So we did. We partnered with Friesland Campina and the first ones in Australia to produce galacto-oligosaccharide, which is the byproduct of the whey protein, and that created massive value for us once those returns started kicking in. And then we went again with lactoferrin, so we were one of the first ones to invest in lactoferrin as Warrnambool Cheese and Butter.
Yep.
Back in I think it was 2013. We did that, and once again it was continuing looking at way we could add value because we needed to continue to add value. And we were a small company that was nimble enough to do that. And so, it's harder for the large companies to do it. And I see replicas of that happening at the moment. I see companies like Provico who are, once again, continuously to invest in value add, looking at what the next components that they can get out of that milk that they can generate new value for. I think I like that space. That's the exciting space.
Yeah.
But it's risky as well.
Of course it is. And especially in the dairy industry where the cost of equipment is unbelievably high. Dealing with a perishable good such as milk, you have to do something with it very, very quickly to turn it into something valuable. It's by its nature a high risk industry in some regards.
Yeah.
Food safety, etc. So Saputo come in and they buy Warrnambool Cheese and Butter. You have got a front row seat to the change in management dynamics, etc. What was your take on, I guess, the culture, maybe managerial culture from a Warrnambool-led management team to an international dairy behemoth?
Yeah. Look, it was interesting. I think that was always in the minds, particularly of our shareholders and as management. What's this large multinational? What are they going to be for us? What's it going to do to our culture? Those things were in the back of our mind. It just wasn't always about value, even though at the end of the day, whoever pays the highest is going to win. But, and our board was quite open in supporting Saputo's bid because we did see some cultural similarities. They talked about the fact that at the end of the day, they're a family company and their culture is all about the family. Big family, obviously, it's a big organisation now. But at the heart of it all was those family principles.
Yeah.
As a part of the executive Warrnambool Cheese and Butter, we got some great insights into that. We spent a lot of time with their executives and some great personnel at that time where we learned a lot from day one. And we thought we knew our business, and they came in with the magic sauce, if you like, that they called it, and once again opened up our eyes to our business in a different way than we've had in before. And that was really looking at our costs, granular on every single thing, which we never had those disciplines before.
Sure.
We were kind of a sort of fast-moving, trying to create value through innovation and so on. Cost-out initiatives were there all the time, obviously, but sometimes they play against each other. If you're cost out all the time, then you sort of lose sight on, some of the investing in some of that innovation. So that was interesting for us, and we could see how you could still have both. And so we did that for quite some time. But then Saputo was always about growth by acquisition. Any opportunity came up, they grabbed it. Something that we've been trying to do as an organisation was to buy the facility where our large chunk of our cheese was being cut and wrapped next door, National Foods facility, where it was being turned into at that time Coon and Cracker Barrel and those products. It was just a natural synergy for us to get hold of that and become for the first time, a branded value-add player. Sure. From being value-add on ingredients, this is a way of us getting into that FMCG space. But we could never get it going, whether it be timing, availability of money at the time, the want of the owners to sell. None of that happened, but it lined up beautifully with Saputo, and so that was the first acquisition. And so that was a relatively smooth sort of bolt-on, but it did, for the first time, expose Warrnambool Cheese and Butter to the FMCG world. And my role pivoted at that time too. I was very much looking at the ingredient side, B2B sort of sales structures globally, and we've now pivoted now to create this new domestic FMCG business, which I was put in charge to do. So that was interesting. So we had to create a whole new lot of capability and resource in that space. That was exciting.
And just on that, really, really briefly, successful that move to diversify into the fast-moving consumer good world?
Yeah. It sort of gave us that product mix then, such a wide product mix, that then we could work out within that what is the best use of milk, where are we going to extract the biggest value from, and had some sort of flexibility in doing that. Less flexibility in regards to supporting a brand. You can't just go and pull out milk from a brand because it's not performing as, because the commodity markets are shut up, for example. But within that, there is some flexibility. So we had all of a sudden extra assets, and then the Murray Goulburn acquisition came on board, and that's even more toys to play with, more product mix. And so there was the excitement about that we have choices now where we put that milk. But then again, at the same time, we had a lot of spare capacity across those plants. So that was the next challenge then.
Okay, so Saputo have come in and they've purchased the Murray Goulburn assets. Your role from then to then transitioning to become the president of the ADPF.
Yeah, okay. So I found, for me personally, that whole transition was exciting because it got me into a space that I'd dabbled in before, and that was the consumer goods business domestically in Australia. And it suited me at the time too because I've been travelling for 15 years constantly, and I had a young family at the time, and so less travel was good too. But it was really exciting to get involved in the domestic side of business and basically take on some quite strong brands within the market. And that happened with the national food side of things. So timing was good because it enabled us to cut our teeth on that business, which was wasn't a small business, but before we stepped up and then got the Murray Goulburn assets. So for me, then it was having a look on the Murray Goulburn side where they were at with their domestic FMCG business. They had some okay brands in there. They were really trying hard to establish and broaden the Devondale brand as their umbrella brand for a whole range of products. And we're doing that, but they were very much had gone down the path of instilling themselves on the retailers, particularly Coles, with doing a lot of their private label tolling as well. So that was their exposure to the domestic retail market. By the time we were able to get in and have a look at Murray Goulburn, they had shrunk a lot of their food service business, which was a shame because they were getting somewhere with that. Very hard to compete with the behemoth of Fonterra, who's focused for decades now on that food service business and dominating it. But nonetheless, Murray Goulburn was a good, strong number 2 option there. But they just let that side of the business wind down. So we tried to ramp that up to reduce our complete exposure within the retail sector because we felt it was very heavy one way, particularly around private label exposure. But for me personally, it was exciting because I'm now playing around with these big contracts and dealing with the Coles and Woolworths and Aldi and Metcash's of the world, and that was fascinating, and built a really good team around me as well. Some ex-national foods people, got the best of the people out of Murray Goulburn, and had a couple of people, from one guy from Warrnambool Cheese Butter that came through the journey with me from day one, and all that was great. And then a couple of good external people. We had built a really good team around us to really tackle what was going to come towards us, which was quite a challenge.
Well, it was a challenge because they were obviously and I think speaking out of school, they were in a bit of a mess at the time, right? So yes, you had the injection of capital and talent from Saputo, but at the end of the day, they needed some help. Yeah. So no doubt a pretty big challenge from your side going into that organisation and working out where the problems were, but where the opportunities were.
Yeah, look, exactly. And I think once again, that's that discipline Saputo had around, they acquired many businesses, all in different states of play, and were able to extract value and make some pretty hard decisions early on. Mm. And so we were able to have a look at some of those assets and, realise that some of them weren't going to last the journey, And at the same time, we've acquired these assets, we were in the midst of this shrinking milk pool as well.
Yeah.
And no one could sort of foresee where that was going to end up. In hindsight, the company might have made some harder decisions around some of the assets at the time, knowing where the milk pool was going to come out. But I think there was always that hope that we'd see some uplift in that milk pool, and therefore that would keep alive some of these assets. But at the end of the day, it didn't happen. So there's decisions done. Once again, the second lot of hard decisions had to be made.
Which I guess that's a nice segue into your next iteration on your career path, which is into the ADPF. Do you want to just touch on really quickly how that came about?
Yeah.
And then how it's been since you started with the ADPF, and because I think it's very pertinent, that conversation around the milk pool in Australia and the management of the milk pool. Just how you've found it since you've been on that side of the fence and advocating for the processes, and just your general view of what's happening in the Australian dairy industry. I know I've just thrown a lot at you, but let's start at your transition into the role.
Yeah, well, the journey for that transition, I'll go back a bit, that's all right. The journey for that transition happened not long after I'd been with Warrnambool Cheese Butter. It was probably a couple of years in. And I formed some really good mentoring type relationships, firstly obviously with John McLean, who was CEO and Managing Director of Warrnambool Cheese Butter for over 30 years. Had spent a lot of time with John. Really, that true mentoring role that I had with him, that's a wonderful relationship. Yeah. Great guy, deemed as well respected within the industry as a senior statesman.
Extremely well respected.
And also fortunate to have a relationship with Pat Rowley at the time. This is straight after dereg, of which he was the mastermind behind, and a lot of people don't realise what the industry was facing at that time, and he needs to be applauded in regards to how he navigated that restructure. So unfortunately, a lot of people are negative about that because they don't know the historical context. Deregulation was going to happen at one point in time, and the fact that they were able to negotiate it on the industry's terms and able to get a fantastic package for those who wanted to leave the industry because they felt they were going to be harshly dealt with without a deregulation was available there. And Pat did that as a Queensland farmer who was probably going to be impacted the most in his region. So I was fortunate to have his there, and then Peter Forhey was the CEO of Gardner Foundation at the time.
Yep.
Those three sort of started talking to me about taking more of a broader industry leadership role, which was fantastic. I felt I was a bit overwhelmed by it all. I'm thinking, why me? But they obviously saw something in me, which I'm very grateful for. And as part of that, Gardner Foundation set me off on the Australian Rural Leadership Program. Fantastic program. I was the first one that Gardner sponsored. They've sponsored someone since then. At the time, and actually, Jadine Wallard, CEO of Australian Dairy Products Federation, is going through that course at the moment. Fantastic opportunity, and opened my eyes up in regards to true leadership. And obviously there was a piece there at the other end that they wanted me to give back. So when I came back, John McLean said, well, I'm going to start stepping down from these industry bodies. I'd like you to step up. So I was quite young at the time and very, very nervous. I think Peter Lavery was the president of the Australian Dairy Products Federation at that time. Had huge respect for him. And so I was all of a sudden on this board and getting an understanding of how advocacy works. At the same time, the Australian Dairy Corporation was restructuring, and I was sat on the restructuring committee for that. So I got some insights into how those RDC structures work, and that was the creation of what is today Dairy Australia. So I was doing all that stuff, and I found that far more exciting, to be honest, than running around the world selling stuff.
What?
Yes, sorry.
More exciting than selling dairy products. Come on. Is there such a thing?
Well, and also you guys do such a good job of going, how can I match that?
Okay.
So that's what really got me interested. I mean, I kept the day job, obviously, for many, many years after that, but it was always in the back of my mind.
Okay.
If I could make something of this down the track, then that would be something of interest to me. So,
sure.
So when I left the big corporate with Saputo, I wasn't planning on doing anything, but at the time, Grant Crothers, who was president of the ADPF at the time, said, I think I've done as much as I can here, and what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm skiing in Japan at the moment. I'm having a good time. He said, well, when you come back, let's have a talk. I came back and he fortunately stepped aside for me. And I had been past president before and was his deputy whilst I was at Saputo for the last couple of years. And Janine was already been embedded as CEO there. I knew her skill level and what she was going to bring that role, and that excited me too. So I've been there now for 2.5 years as the executive chair. Yeah.
Well, it does seem like the activity and the breadth of what you guys are covering off seems to have increased dramatically from what I can see anyway. I don't know if you've been on the inside now for a long time, so maybe that's not the case. I'm just noticing it more recently where it seems you have stepped up your advocacy work and your engagement within the industry. Is that fair to say, or has it always been at an equal level?
No, look, I think it has. Not all on my watch. Grant was heading down that path. I think there's two major factors to that. Firstly, once again, Janine has been fantastic in regards to really pushing the things that we should be involved in and then seeing them through. Very action-driven, action-orientated. The challenge with Janine is making sure she's not burning herself out with things, because she'll take on everything.
Sure.
But that's great. That's fantastic. So that's the first factor.
Yep.
The second factor is we've probably gone into spaces that we probably did need to in the past with traditional structures. The dairy plan kind of blew a lot of the traditional structures up, which is okay. You need to revisit these things, but basically just clean the table off and say, let's start again. And I think that was a major mistake, because now what it's left us with is a weakened Australian Dairy Industry Council. And I'm deputy chair of that as part of my role as executive chair of ADPF. So I do put a lot of this on myself as well. But that structure worked, where we had an overarching body made up of directors from Australian Dairy Products Federation, directors from the Australian Dairy Farmers, working together on broad issues, of which I'd say 98% of the issues that we face into are industry-wide. Mm-hmm. But basically the dairy plan said, no, we're getting rid of that. We're putting advocacy and all the pieces that go with that in with the RDC, with Dairy Australia. We're going to have this one house concept, of which has never been done before, because once again, the RDC structure is the fact that half their money comes from the levy, and then matching funding into R&D comes from the Commonwealth. So a bit hard to then advocate, which is largely advocating against the government, for the government, with the government sort of thing.
Yeah. It's very muddled.
Very muddled, and that's why it's never happened before.
Yeah.
We were kind of misled a little bit by the government that we could do it, but then they soon retracted on that.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time trying to get this one house going, and in the meantime it weakened what was the existing structures. So there's a lot more that ADIC had done in the past, should be doing. We find that we've taken a lot of that stuff on ourselves as ADPF, working with the farmers as best we possibly can. But once again, it was a structural move, because that old structure created this vacuum. And so we go to our members and say, what do you want us to get involved in, and all of that.
So that leads to this question now, where it seems to me that there is and I've spoken about it many times, but the tension within the industry right now between the dairy farmers and the processors and the way the industry is currently running. Number one, do you think that's fair, a fair comment? And number two, how do you see that being reconciled?
Yeah, look, that's a very fair comment. I think the danger is, though, a lot of that gets played out in public more than what it actually is. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying it's not an issue. It is an issue. Like I already said, I think the ADIC should be doing a lot more than traditionally what it used to. And I go back to that. I benchmark best practice against how it used to be done, in the early 2000s from DREG and then through, where the focus was put on the Australian Dairy Industry Council. The president of the Australian Dairy Industry Council, which was always a farmer in the past, wore that broad industry hat. At the end of the day, representing farmers, sure, but also recognising to benefit farmers, you have to wear that broad industry hat.
We're all in it together.
We're all in it together.
Yeah.
And like I said, we were spoilt with some fantastic, and this is elder statespeople, or statesmen, let's call it that. And there's some, and I know that there's some fantastic potential leaders out there that can mirror what they did, but it was that strong individual voice for the farmers that was also understanding of the whole of supply chain. And so I go back to those days. And I'll probably go back to those days too much because I've probably spent a good 18 months in this role trying to bring back what we used to have, realising that times changed, that the days of having that strong elderly sort of statesperson, one may not be wanted by certain generations anymore, but at the same time, it's hard in this fast-moving environment for someone to be able to resonate so strongly as an individual anymore. So I pedaled away from that thought and thought a lot of what we do as an industry and where we really join hands and well, you never ever see. And I've been watching this podcast, a couple of them at least, and there's a central theme that has permeated through a lot of your talks with Barry and Peter and so on. There was a central theme there where, I think probably the best example of that was when you go to a farmer town hall and, you get a lot of dissent, you get a lot of negative farmers there, but the vast majority in those rooms are very much aligned with, what they see as a strong industry and what they want. The thing is they're just silently in there, just going about it.
So they're so quiet.
Business, so quiet.
Yeah.
And they're the vast majority.
Yeah.
So I think, to get that true industry perspective and trying to do things jointly and working towards a common direction, I've spent a lot more energy and time with those type of farm leaders, if you like. You don't hear from them, though, but they're in there doing it and they're bringing people on that journey and you don't see that, but it's happening. So that's where I see the strength and the momentum for our industries coming from that sector.
Yeah, it is a wonderful point. And you're right. I've spoken about it quite a lot. I guess a part of it is I come back to it because I lament that there is so much negativity there, or certainly that's what you hear. Whereas there is some great stories and there's some real positivity about where we're going. It's not just all about the shrinking milk pool and the fighting over it every May, June and July. That is an issue for sure. But there's some really, really good news stories out there as well of investment and people and young entrepreneurial people coming into the industry to grow it. So I think there is some structural. I don't know if I agree in the sense of going backwards is such a bad thing. I do think that we do need that central voice back. What that then looks like and who the figurehead is, that I think that's open to interpretation or voting or what it might be, but the actual structure has to be, I think anyway, it needs to go back to what it was, away from Dairy Australia and into more of that independent voice. Yeah. But to tell that story and to attract talent, particularly and investment into the Australian dairy industry. Yeah. So where to from here, John?
Look, I agree with you 100%. I would love to get back to that, but I said the realisation is that that's not going to happen anytime soon. But we've got a lot to do. We're just finishing off our next 5-year strategy. You'll see us through to 2030. It's a lot of more of the same. It's strengthening up and reprioritising certain areas. And the heart of it all is about productivity, milk growth, and our competitiveness, not only from a global perspective, but within our own domestic market. We're still facing the competition from imports. That's not going to go away.
It is not going away.
I think our members realise that. It's a struggle. They're in there pivoting their business, strengthening their business as best as they possibly can. They've invested a lot in milk. And I think the frustrating part hasn't seen the return in that coming in the milk growth that we would like to see. Over the last couple of years, there's been some fantastic green shoots of that. And then you'll have these extreme weather events, droughts in Victoria and South Australia, and floods up in New South Wales, and you go,
True.
And then you've got to pull away from that going, well, at the heart of things, people are still getting on with things. If anything, these things strengthen you. I was talking to a farming couple the other day who were down in Simpson. It's once again got them to relook at their business again, knowing that these extreme droughts are going to come in and out. It's hard because everyone was right up against it from growing in feed. We've got some rain now. Is it enough? All that sort of thing. But I like talking to those people because they've taken a positive out of what was a really negative situation for them. And that's what That's what I want to see, because that will then buy into this whole productivity and commission study that we did, which the government paid for. Thank you very much. And out of that is some fantastic actions that we've got. And we just need to, as a whole of industry, get in and start doing that. Mind you, we've had this report now since Feb. And we, from an ADPF point of view, are pushing for it. It's a big part of our strategy, as we've said. Dairy Australia is also in the midst of their strategy, so we'll get to see that shortly. And ADF is working on theirs. So we're all aligned in regards to our timeframes here. We should be grabbing hold of that productivity report and going, this is fantastic. We all bought into this. This is all of our views on what we think we need to do. And there's some low-hanging fruit there, and there's some bigger, ambitious things. But let's get in as an industry and drive that.
Yeah, it's a wonderful point. Wrangling those cats and getting everyone together with the one voice. We are coming towards the end of here, John. It's been a wonderful chat. But I'm going to leave you with one question, and it's a curly one.
All right.
The way we price milk here in Australia as part of a cornerstone in their code of conduct. Your current take on the situation as it is at the moment, and the possibility, I guess, your own view of whether it does need to be tweaked, or is it just too hard? And can we continue? Could we grow milk the way that milk is currently priced?
I think institutionally we have a structure there that people largely understand and used to it. The way the code is, it does place a lot more risk on the processor. Mm-hmm. But that did have to happen.
Yes.
That did have to happen. So we've got that there. We're going through a review now, and the ADPF is basically just really tweaking around with some of the commercial side of things. We believe that there should be a longer cooling off, a shorter cooling off period, because that cooling off period is now extending into the new production year. We've got processors picking up milk from uncontracted farmers well into July now. So structurally, we think those things should change. But once again, that structure in regards to having an opening price and then step-ups throughout the year, I think is going to be very hard to unravel. It does put us out of lockstep, though, with some of our competitors who have much more flexibility in their pricing arrangement, but they also have much more exposure to the global markets than what we do. And so, therefore, I think we've got a structure there that sort of goes across both, if you like. Once again, it's then up to the processors and how they use that. I think there's a lot of education going on, a lot of misunderstanding. The first few years around that code is that opening price is just a minimum price that you're giving out there. You can play around with that price as much as you like above that. We've seen a lot of that happening, particularly this season, as people try to attract milk or retain milk and so on. So I think from a competition point of view, the farmers should be happy it's working.
Yeah, well, agreed. And I think from their perspective, it's achieving what they wanted to achieve, which is that known income, or the baseline known income for them. I tend to agree with you. I think it would be incredibly difficult to unpick that, and it would cause a huge amount of turmoil in the industry if we even tried.
Yeah.
So anyway, on that curly question to finish, John, mate, it's been a wonderful chat. Thank you very much. I've learned a lot about you and a lot of the dairy background and history. So thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you. And I just want to say quickly, what you're doing with this podcast is fantastic. We get so much negativity about our industry through our tabloid newspapers and the media. That's what they thrive on. And so therefore you doing a podcast is an alternative voice to that. So I really appreciate you guys doing that.
You're very welcome.
Okay,
Thanks, John.
You.
Thanks, mate.
Cheers. Thanks.
Thanks, mate.